Okay, I'm going to start just doing our opening slides here. Hi, everyone. I'm Marcia Nedland. I am a consultant, but I'm also on the National Middle Neighborhood Steering Committee, and I am the organizer for the Middle Neighborhoods Community Practice. And today we're doing the second in our series of webinars about expanding resources, in particular, expanding them beyond just federal sources. And this one is going to address why Philadelphia and Chicago have issued bonds that are going to invest millions in middle neighborhoods and middle neighborhood households. So you may have joined us in our last webinar, which was about sales tax revenue. If you didn't, you can find that on our YouTube page. And now we're just doing a little poll to see what sector you're joining from. We normally have about maybe, 2/3 nonprofits, 1/3 government, but I suspect it'll be a little bit different this time. Our next webinar is going to be about the third and final, as far as we know, in this series. It's going to be about using general revenue in local government for middle neighborhood programming. Oh, we still have a good, strong showing of nonprofits. Okay, that's great. We're hoping that you'll have some messages to carry away to perhaps persuade your local government to consider um, doing some bond funding for work in middle neighborhoods. So just a quick couple of slides about the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative. If you haven't heard about us already, we're a national initiative that sort of started from a bunch of researchers, policymakers, and practitioners who noticed that the middle neighborhoods we were working in, and by that we mean neither the most disinvested nor the healthiest, were not having much attention paid to them, but they were actually declining as we looked at their long-term stats on housing values, on home ownership, on all kinds of different factors like that. So this is an initiative that has grown over the years to be co-hosted by the National Community Stabilization Trust and NeighborWorks America. And the point of it is to mobilize attention on these neighborhoods and cities because they are disappearing through either neglect or gentrification. And we have a community practice which pulls together these webinars and does newsletters and does other stuff that helps practitioners connect with each other. We help to organize people for researchers to interview, or we conduct research ourselves. NCST does policy analysis and advocacy around certain issues that relate to this. And then we have some communication strategies to advance awareness. So you can go next slide, Anne. Um, as I said, middle neighborhoods are basically, to us, we don't have hard and fast metrics, but they tend to be in that 60 to 120% of median income, or 80 to 120, depending on how your city sits within its county. And these were neighborhoods that were mostly single family neighborhoods that were built for families with children in their day. They tend to be still well more than 50% owner occupied, but they probably used to be more like 90% owner occupied. Their housing stock is aging. It's still in generally acceptable condition, but it often lacks features and updates that would make it compete well for today's home buyers. So the one we see a lot is the one bathroom home, which is not something that today's home buyers are really interested in. And those properties, research has shown in local situations over and over again, are much more likely to be purchased by investors for rental than they are by first-time home buyers. One of the things I love about middle neighborhoods is that they are more racially, ethnically, and economically diverse than either their lower income or higher income, or you might say more disinvested or less disinvested neighborhoods. I think they are those neighborhoods that we are always trying to create to make neighborhoods more stable and resilient over time. So today we have a great team of panelists. We have two cities represented. From the city of Chicago, we have Matt Stern, who's the Deputy Commissioner for the Bureau of Economic Development, and we have Tim Jeffries, who's the Managing Deputy Commissioner for the Bureau of Economic Development. And from Philadelphia, we have Jackie Dunn, who's the City Treasurer, and we have Angela Brooks, who's the Chief Housing and Urban Development Officer for Mayor Sherrell Parker in her office. So some of you may know Mayor Parker has, when she was a councilwoman, was an early supporter of Middle Neighborhoods Initiative, has spoken at our events several times, and sometimes refers to herself as the mayor of Middle Neighborhoods. So we're always interested in what she's doing. So our agenda for today is going to be just to, have Chicago start out and talk to us about their housing and economic development bond, which they did last year, and also to give us a little taste of the history of their bonding and also their TIF districts, which has something to do with why they're doing more bonding now. And then we'll switch over to Philadelphia, and they'll talk about their Housing Opportunities Made Easy, or HOME bond, which was finally approved this year, and what their plans are to do with that funding. And then we'll have some time for Q&A afterward. And if you'd like to type your questions into either the chat or the Q&A function in Zoom, I'll definitely pick those up at the end of our presentations, and we'll have a discussion about those. Okay, so we're going to kick off with Chicago with Tim and Matt. And so Tim and Matt, I'll let you take it away. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thanks for the introductions. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you're tuning in from. Matt Stern, joined by Tim Jeffries. I want to take a brief minute to correct our titles ever so slightly. I'm a Deputy Commissioner of the Bureau of Policy Planning and Implementation at the Housing Department at the city, and Tim is the Managing Deputy of the Bureau of Economic Development at the Planning Department. We get to work closely together on a variety of issues, and we're happy to be here today talking about our work with the Housing and Economic Development Bond. So what we know is that the HED bond, or the Housing and Economic Development Bond, was a $1.25 billion investment in local housing and economic development efforts that, as Marcia said, was passed early last year, 2024. It's been one of Mayor Brandon Johnson's signature early term policy initiatives. Broadly speaking, I don't, neither of us sit within the CFO's office. Neither of us do the work of putting together and selling bond packages ourselves. So we know less about that side of things, but certainly have learned plenty along the ways. Cities bond all the time for public works projects, right? So cities are not new to bonding, but at least in Chicago is fairly new to using our ability to bond to raise funds for things that are traditionally privately owned. And even though they pursue a public purpose, they aren't necessarily traditionally considered public works. This is actually our second bond in recent history that would fall in this category. The first we'll touch on more in a little bit and talk in more detail about the HED bond as well. What we're doing with the money and some of the things that have worked well and some of the challenges that we've identified to running programs with these kinds of funds. But first, and if you can go to the next slide, please, I want to give a little bit of context around Chicago, because I know this is a national group. Chicago is the third largest city in the country by population, over 2.5 million people, over 200 square miles, a city of neighborhoods, as we call it, a dramatic diversity in housing stock, housing age, density, et cetera, over 1 million housing units in total. We also, although we are generally more affordable than many of our peers, especially on the coasts, we do have a growing housing affordability issue with a gap of over 120,000 affordable units as measured a number of years ago, right? We haven't seen a repeat analysis comprehensively since 2022, but we expect that number to only have increased substantially. We also are challenged by a variety of difficult budget conditions. We are going into budget season right now with a $1.5 billion budget gap for next year's budget. This challenge originates substantially from an unfunded pension liability that has been decades in the making. And so finding the funds to do the work that we need to do as a planning department and as a housing department is not easy, which is one of the things that has led us here. Next slide. So because you are the middle neighborhoods community of practice, we wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit about Chicago's middle neighborhoods. I will be honest, this is not a term that either of our departments use, nor do we have a clear definition of what would make a middle neighborhood in Chicago. So I wanted to orient you a little bit to the Chicago landscape by presenting 4 different maps that I think approximate what we could fairly refer to as middle neighborhoods. The first is where the Chicago Bungalow exists. I think the Chicago Bungalow Association is on the line today, so props to them for the work that they do, as well as the map on the left side of the screen. The Chicago Bungalow is a vernacular piece of Chicago's architecture, primarily built in the early 20th century, affordable modern homes that have held up very well over the last 100 years and so fit perfectly into that housing stock that Marsha was talking about a few minutes ago. It's aged, yes, but it's still quality housing. I think is probably a fairly close corollary. On the right here, the housing department has run the city's inclusionary zoning regulations and policies for some time. Inclusionary zoning, of course, is the development of affordable units in exchange for zoning rights. And so where we're seeing affordable units created under our inclusionary zoning program is where development has happened most over the last 15 years. It's safe to assume that the neighborhoods with lots of red dots on the right side of your screen are probably not middle neighborhoods. The middle neighborhoods are probably in all of the other areas on this slide. Next slide, please. The next 2 maps are both from the Voorhees Center at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and present sort of 2 other hypotheses that I'll present here. This is a map of income change over what is that, 45 years between 1970 and 2016. Blue areas represent increases in income. They happen to align fairly closely with the red dots on the previous screen, where we're seeing lots of development. Red areas, decreases in income. What does that look like? It looks like the Chicago Bungalow Association map. So, looking at this, the yellow obviously being the ones that are in between. Looking at this, one might draw a conclusion that we have fewer and fewer middle neighborhoods in the city, which I imagine is a conclusion that many of us are drawing about the places that we work. Next slide. This will be the last one that I present, also from the Voorhees Center. This is, if the last slide was change in income, this is actual incomes. The bluer, the higher the income, the redder, the lower the income. And you're seeing the change over time, over a very similar time period on this one. If we presuppose, as a baseline assumption that the tan areas are middle neighborhoods, then we can see that we had a lot of them half a century ago, and those neighborhoods are struggling more and more as we age to the future. So that's a little bit of context. I'll turn it over to Tim to give an introduction to the bond itself and our history of doing it, and then we'll just talk about some of the projects we're doing. Thank you.
Next slide, please. I guess, yes, and thanks, Matt. Tim Jeffries, Managing Deputy Commissioner at the City of Chicago's Planning Department. Yeah, as Matt said, this bond that we're talking about today is a $1.25 billion obligation meant to run for a term of 5 years. It's split evenly between our 2 departments. We work very close with one another. departments are on the same floor and everything, so there's no turf battle over the money. Uh, and it's as I said, it's meant to be a 5-year run, so about $125 million per year. But we already we imagine programs will ramp up, so that's a theoretical number. Also, as Matt said, the use of bonds historically for the city of Chicago is very atypical. The closest thing we could find was examples from the 90s when the city was undertaking its uh, uh, strategy of rebuilding its former Chicago Housing Authority, and they would issue bonds associated with the horizontal infrastructure, but nothing like we're using it today. Historically, the city of Chicago's use of funds for things like that was TIF. And I guess anyone that knows Chicago is that's probably not surprising because we are, I think, by most metrics, the most TIFed city in America. At our peak, which was in like 2018, 2019, I think there was 180 unique TIF districts. It's too many. I can say that it's too many. We were over TIFed, and that came with its whole litany of problems that I'll describe in a minute. But bonds really became a source for our departments um, through what we call the Chicago Recovery Plan, but that was really the overarching armature of our ARPA dollars for the federal allocation from COVID relief. Um, that included, I think, $1.2 billion from the feds and then $600 million in a local bond issuance. And for the first time in since anyone here can remember, the city got a dedicated bond allocation for housing and economic development activities. And that was sort of huge for us. We, as we rolled it out, there was certainly some new programs that we did, but I think probably the majority of the funds, um, both departments made a conscious choice to treat as a source and not a program. And I think that became a critical distinction for us, like meaning that we just poured this money into things that we were already doing, but with these funds, we could just do it in a slightly different way. Part of that was a strategic choice for us. Part of it was an operational choice. It's hard to stand up new programs. But the benefits of doing that were, I think I don't want to speak for Matt, but I will. It's like they were immediately obvious. With TIF as our funding source, our exclusive funding source, we were hemmed in by a lot of restrictions, whether they're geographic, whether they were state level restrictions, like TIF in Illinois cannot be used for vertical construction. Like, why? Like, I don't know, but that's what the TIF Act says, so we can't do it. And so it creates it's, the management of TIF in Chicago is the management of like these limitations, and um, everything was a little bit easier with bond and CRP. Those dollars were obviously very limited, though. I think as of last year, every cent has been allocated, and I personally have nothing left. Uh, so, but we knew that we wanted to keep this going, and so we came up with a strategy that was really a win-win-win on all fronts. It was a win operationally, it was a win for our projects, it was a win politically because, as I say here and we'll describe, we were able to take a $1.25 billion bond issuance to City Council and tell them, you don't need to vote on a property tax increase with this. Um, and that frankly made it palatable. Uh, and so we can go to the next slide. Our solution to do this was, sort of ironically based on the city being so over reliant on TIF. Um, the numbers here at the top, it says that I think this is 2025 to 2027. We have 45 TIF districts that are set to expire. That will drop us a little bit above 100. There was just a really like proliferation of TIF in the early to mid 90s, and they last 24 years here. And the 24 years is just coming due for a lot of these. And so if these districts are allowed to expire, they're putting a tremendous amount of levy back onto the tax rolls. And that levy is just there. And the levy is also persistent because that levy is permanently added to the base. Every single year that we levy on it, that levy is still there. And over a 15-year period, this results in about $300 million per year, every single year thereafter, which is a lot of money. And it turns out that 1.25 billion, based on our modeling, needs about $81 million in revenue to support that kind of debt service, which is the red line. And the green line is the annual revenue coming back to the city. And in the most simple terms, red line below green bars, good. And in all cases, we're below the green bars. And if you look at the sort of persistent over time cumulative revenue with this red bar, it becomes incredibly stark how much revenue is coming in from these districts. So this helped us from a operational, political standpoint in like selling the notion that this was needed, but it also the idea that we could say everyone knows TIF, loves TIF. That they don't really love TIF; they love what it does. But it's like we can still deliver the things that TIF does, make the program better, put it on stable footing and a best practice on a national basis, and then also not vote on taxes. City council approved it, so they obviously bought into that message. But it was a big thing for us to be able to give that message and do so. So just if we go to the next slide, we can give a little bit of flavor about like what we're actually planning on doing with this. I think ultimately it was a good thing, but because this was so new to our city council, there was a demand for a fair amount of rigor on like what would we do? How would this be going? Transparency, all those things. And we're not opposed to any of that. It was just because of it, we have a lot of idea about what we're going to do. So this is just the economic development part. I'll kick it over to Matt to do the housing, but this gives a little bit of idea. We'll have this community development grant program. This is a CDG. CDG is somewhat new. Having this bond source available citywide allowed us to collapse all of our sources. So like we don't have a standalone TIF program anymore. All we have is community development grants, and it is funded as a source by TIF and by bond. And so we have 3 tracks of that program. You can see the allocations, but we anticipate over this run we'll support 400 projects total, and that spans from small mom and pop businesses to like large catalytic projects. We're also doing small business and capacity building. We're intending on giving pre-development grants. We have a lot of projects that they're good ideas. They're good ideas, but lending is hard in missing middle neighborhoods and disinvested neighborhoods for a lot of reasons. And it's the hardest dollars to get. And we oftentimes have people that they have a good idea, but they maybe don't have a lot of development experience. So this is about giving them small 150K grants. They're like little bets the city can make that says like, we think this is good, but like your zoning's not good, and you don't have architecture and engineering, or the site needs remediation. Like go and do some of those activities and make it more ready to go so that a lender will look at it and see like this is a fully fleshed out capital P project and not just an idea. We're also doing workforce training, jobs training for employers to get local employees like upskilled, or even just like have the businesses have the financial wherewithal to bring on new staff because training is hard. And then we also have this missing middle housing strategy that is leveraging city vacant lots to develop new housing units. I'll pause on that one and we can go to the next slide. I'll describe that one a little bit more in a second. If we go, so this is just an idea. This is a project that came through our CDG Medium program. This for my side of the table, at least, this will be the first project that we close on, which should be happening 2 weeks-ish. This is in the Austin neighborhood on our west side. It's a 22,000 square foot facility. It's going to be providing pediatric specialists and as well as behavioral health care, and anchored by Lurie Children's Hospital, one of our big flagship institutions, as well as Thresholds. It's a local nonprofit. It's also going to have community office space for local organizations. It's going to have a branch bank and a coffee shop. This is a $20 million project all in, with the city providing about $5 million. This is a larger project for us, but it's not unrepresentative of the kind of works that we're doing and the projects that we're targeting. We go to the next one. And I'll keep this brief in the interest of time, but this is our missing middle infill project. If the city has a huge inventory of land, that's a liability, and it's an unrealized asset from a taxation perspective, and they represent like a clear, like, broken teeth on blocks that just they're blight. So what the city has done is we packaged a lot of these city-owned lands together, and they're in very distinct clusters where it might be, 15 lots on a 2-block radius or something like that. And it's trying to fill in every hole on that block. And then we put out RFPs asking for developers to, like, give us your proposal to bid on these projects. Give us your concept. We're looking for like high quality, well-designed, multifamily housing. There's some allowance for single family, but it's mostly not. A lot of 2, 3 flats, or 6 flats, up to 8 as well, I think. And the city will provide a subsidy of $150K per unit. So we have 2 rounds done. I think through those 2 rounds, it will result in 225 units and 65 vacant lots redeveloped with homes that roughly look like this. And because they're clustered and because developers are working at scale, there's a lot of cost efficiencies and savings. And at 150K a unit, it's like that's a for Chicago, for a city subsidy, that's a great price. And then I'll kick it over to Matt to talk about some of the housing stuff.
Thanks, Tim. Next slide, please. We're tight on time, so I will move quickly through some of this, but as Tim described, sort of half to his department, half to the housing department, each with these very specific allocations. You can see the sort of smaller text on this slide of specific programs with their sort of account totals. But broadly speaking, this work falls into 3 categories for us. The single largest is the development of affordable rental housing. Then over $200 million for homeownership work. This homeownership work includes both purchase price assistance and home repair work to keep low-income homeowners in their homes and help low and moderate income homeowners get into homes. It also includes a large chunk of change for our rebuilding and preservation funding. These 2 programs specifically, I think, are those that are most targeted at middle neighborhoods type work. Our rebuilding and preservation work specifically supporting neighborhoods that are disinvested or becoming disinvested, and trying to preserve and rehabilitate properties within them. I'll do a few quick examples. Next slide, please. The first, just within our affordable housing rental bucket, Chicago is unusual. We're one of the few cities in the country with an independent allocation of low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC. So we are our own housing finance agency. Anyone on the call who knows LIHTC knows that LIHTC is no longer sufficient to close a housing project. There is a need for a lot of gap financing on all of these deals, in addition to the LIHTC equity that's generated. And CRP, the Chicago Recovery Plan, has been for the last few years one of our major sources of gap financing. CDBG and home have traditionally been our sources, and we all know that there's a lot of risk there in terms of what will happen to it in the near-term future. So now that CRP is winding down for us, the Housing and Economic Development Bond is becoming that next source of gap financing for the next 5 years. The rendering on the slide here is a 45-unit LIHTC building that just broke ground a couple of weeks ago, led by it's actually a native-led organization, Visionary Ventures, in partnership with a longstanding affordable housing developer here in Chicago, Full Circle, really focusing on providing housing and community support to Chicago's native population. Next slide, please. We are also doing a lot of homeownership work. The picture on the slide is two manufactured homes built and installed by a local manufactured home startup here in Chicago on previously city-owned vacant lots and supported through down payments assistance and other subsidy from us to have these homes owned and occupied by moderate income Chicagoans. We are about to launch an RFP for a very, very large down payment assistance program funded directly by the Housing and Economic Development Bond. That should be released in the next month or so. And then next slide. Then I do want to talk about our preservation program specifically. We do work in the co-op preservation space and HOA preservation space. The HOA condo association on the left side of the screen is one that will soon be receiving funds from our co-op preservation program funded by this bond for reinvestment that will allow hopefully the co-op to sort of reset its reserves and get back on healthy healthy footing. And then on the right is a new build home through our rebuild program, which lifts up and supports smaller, emerging, often BIPOC developers and provides them with capital assistance to take on projects in their own communities. So it was a very, very high level breeze through our last slide. On the next slide, Tim and I will sort of do together. I'll start and he can jump in if I missed anything. I do want to talk for a minute about some of the benefits that we've seen and challenges we've seen of working with bond funding. Tim mentioned a number of the benefits already. We have funding that's immediately available that's paid for with tax revenue over time. It creates a dedicated source of revenue that sits outside of our annual budgeting process. So, you know, we are still knee deep, neck deep, really, in each annual budgeting process on behalf of our respective departments, but this money is safe and is not touched by those negotiations. It's free from federal uncertainty. It is also free from certain federal restrictions. Income limits, environmental review rules, et cetera, don't apply. Those policies are often very well intentioned, and we often have very similar policies that we enforce at a local level. But we all on the call know that those restrictions are timely and costly to comply with. And so we don't have to do that for a project without federal funds. It's not all, you know, great, though. There are some challenges we've identified with time. One is that these bond investments, because they are eventually funded by the property tax levy, are expected to increase that property tax base with time, which limits the kinds of projects we feel comfortable undertaking. I will note that sort of ironically, because it's not federal, we don't have Davis-Bacon compliance. We do have Illinois prevailing wage requirement. And Illinois prevailing wage actually does not make exceptions for small projects like Davis-Bacon does. And so we actually have projects shifting from CDBG onto local bond funding that are dealing with prevailing wage type requirements for the first time. And that's been a challenge. For those deep in the weeds, you'll know that bonding comes in two flavors: tax exempt and taxable. Tax exempt bonds are cheaper for cities to issue, but they have to be used in a variety of very strict ways. They absolutely must be capital funding, not operating. They cannot be used for loans, and those can both be challenging in their own right. And then, of course, this is a shorter term solution. You know, it's a wonderful solution right now. It will end in 4 or 5 years, and we'll have to figure out what's next. And so that challenge is real. Tim, anything else you would want to add? We are a bit over time.
Nope, you got it all, I think.
Okay, so our next slide is just our title slide again, I think. So thank you very much for the time, and happy to take questions later. Thanks.
Guys, that was really fascinating. I obviously, as I probably shared with our speakers, I've never worked in city government. I've always come from the community nonprofit side. And so learning about the intricacies of bonds is actually quite interesting to me. There was one, I wanted to know if you could just clarify for people what a TIF is, because not everybody here might know what a tax increment financing means.
Sure. It's tax increment financing. It's a value capture mechanism. You draw a circle on a map, and the taxes of those properties within the circle establish a base. Let's say it's $100. The $100 continues to go to the taxing bodies as they normally do. And then over time, as the taxes increase because of development, inflation, just increased taxes generally, the increment, the number above the base. So 105, the 100 goes to the base as it always did. The 5 stays within the circle for improvements.
Yeah, so it's very geographically restricted, which can make things really complicated. And when you just mentioned how many TIF districts you have, that's a lot of TIF districts to manage. I will save my biggest question toward the end, but it has to do with how much I'm thrilled that you're doing condo and co-op sort of bailouts, and you can correct my use of that term later. But let's move on right now to the city of Philadelphia, who just is, launching their new bond initiative, Housing Opportunities Made Easy. So Jackie and Angela, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll let you take it away.
Great. Thanks, Marcia. Again, Jackie Dunn, City Treasurer, and Angela and I are excited to be here with you to talk about this exciting investment and initiative that Mayor Parker's administration is embarking on. I come from a family of public school teachers, so before we jump into the bond portion of what we are doing here, I wanted to kind of take it back to the 101 level for those who don't work in this world every day to talk about some of the general concepts that any government is looking at when they're about to issue bonds. And thanks to the Chicago team for just kind of going through the specifics on exactly what they grappled with there. But if we can jump to the next slide, I just wanted to walk through a couple key points, and then we'll talk about the home program in Philadelphia. But governments like Philadelphia and Chicago issue bonds so that we can borrow money from investors in exchange for receiving those funds up front. We agree to repay that amount over time plus interest. So this, taking it to the very basic level is conceptually very similar to you or I taking out a loan or a mortgage. And generally, this process is used to help us fund major infrastructure projects, make major capital investments that benefit our residents over many years for projects that have long useful lives when we don't have money immediately available in the current year to pay for that project cost up front. Common investments that you'll see governments make using bond funds are things like street repairs, investments in water and sewer systems, large equipment purchases like a fire truck or a trash compactor, those type of things, investments in municipal buildings. But you can also see governments and housing agencies or housing authorities issue bonds to support investments in affordable housing programs that also provide a public benefit for those capital investments. And so when a government is thinking about issuing debt, the concerns or the things that you need to understand really fall into 2 buckets, the legal side and the financial considerations. So legally, you need to understand what authorizations or approvals that you need to issue the debt and who needs to approve those. So in Philadelphia, we derive our ability to borrow under various state laws, like most local jurisdictions do. And we also have to go to our local governing body, which in our case is a city council, to pass a local ordinance that outlines exactly what we are authorized to borrow for, how much we're authorized to borrow, what types of projects or investments that we can use those bond funds on, and then the terms of the transaction. So things like what funding sources are pledged and other restrictions on how the bond is structured. We also need to think about tax considerations. The Chicago team mentioned that, but tax law defines what type of bonds you can issue. A lot of government borrowing is done on a tax exempt basis. We have that ability given the governmental status, but oftentimes affordable housing programs can fall into the taxable side. So you need to work through all of those legal questions as well as you're thinking about investments that you'd like to make. And then on the financial end, we also need to think about the impact of the proposed debt on the overall finances of the governing jurisdiction, not just in the current year, but in the future. When you borrow money, you're often making repayments over 20 to 30 years, so a long time horizon. And borrowing costs more than if we had the money up front to make those investments. So we need to make sure we can afford those mandatory repayments over time. We do this by putting together a budget and a capital budget and plan each year so that we are identifying the projects that we would like to invest in, and then we're looking at what that financial impact is over time in the larger context of our overall financial resources and other things that we need to invest in. In Philadelphia, we publish both our proposed and our operating budget, our capital budget online, so you can look through those plans every year to see what the city and the mayor and our city council have authorized and what our future year plans are. The ordinances and all of the public hearing transcripts also related to the budget process and any debate over bond transactions are also all available online. So there's a lot of public information out there for those who are interested. And then the Chicago team laid out some really nice context around their finances that we also share. So we face really very similar challenges with having lower reserve levels, having legacy unfunded pension liabilities, and some high fixed costs from legacy borrowings that are due over the next 5 years, while also having a relatively weaker tax base. So we have a generally higher poverty level than most other large cities, and certainly than our surrounding suburban jurisdictions or collar counties. And we have to think about the balance between making investments to help address some of those challenges with our ability to save money to weather future storms or uncertainties that might come down the road. So we're constantly looking at what is the right balance to strike. So now we can jump into the more exciting part, which is what we are doing with the Housing Opportunities Made Easy plan or the home plan. So in this past spring, Mayor Parker introduced one of her signature programs to help increase and promote affordable housing and homeownership in Philadelphia. We have historically, over the last 2 decades, from time to time, issued bonds to invest in affordable housing or other community or neighborhood revitalization programs. So conceptually not something new to us, but the size and the scale has varied over time. For this transaction, we've authorized an investment of $800 million that's planned to be made over 2 transactions. So the first transaction that we're working on now is $400 million to invest in a basket of programs. And the structure of the transaction is through our service agreement structure. So it's not backed by a specific tax source, but it's backed by a broad appropriation pledge of current revenues that the city has. So it's a broader tax pledge versus promising or securitizing a type of a tax. So just another distinction relative to some of the other projects that you've heard today. But the investments really fall in 4 main categories, and Angela will do much more justice to this than I will in the next couple slides. But we want to invest in production. So Philadelphia does have a very old housing stock, which you'll hear more about soon. So making sure that that we're not only preserving, but helping to create more units across various income bands and across neighborhoods in the city, preserving the current stock that we have. So the most affordable house is often the one that you're already in. And we have a number of great existing city programs that we're hoping to provide additional funding towards through this bond transaction. Efforts to help stabilize or promote stability. So helping to prevent eviction or to divert eviction, providing rental assistance to folks, and some other programs that are run out of our Office of Homelessness Prevention as well. And then that 4th bucket is really incentives. So finding ways to help reduce down payment or provide down payment assistance and reduce that cost, to make low cost loans and grants, and to help folks tackle other issues like tangled title or will challenges. So a really nice array of programs that we're looking to support. And as Angela will talk about soon, Mayor Parker has been an early champion of middle neighborhoods. And so you'll see that we're not only looking to help invest and in lower income areas and census districts in the city, but also in middle neighborhood areas as well. And with that, I will pass it to Angela.
Thank you, Jackie. Great. Well, as Jackie kind of did a great outline, and it's hard sometimes to remember our finance team, our finance folks, because they actually get the program stuff. So we're super lucky in Philadelphia for that. I'm a new Philadelphian, actually just moved there from Chicago. So it was great to hear Matt and Tim talk about my former hometown. But Philadelphia is really trying to address a shortage. We've got about 17,000 homes we're short. And as Jackie mentioned, of our aging housing stock, we are probably about 500,000 were built before 1960 and even more before 1940. So with the aging housing stock, we recognize, and also we have a very high home ownership number, but we also have a high percentage of low income homeowners. So maintenance on some of the existing housing stock hasn't been there. So when we first started our housing plan, one of the first data points was recognizing there was a huge need for preservation. And how do we really address immediate attention to providing safe and quality homes for our residents? Next slide. And so this is kind of the analysis that we went through of our middle neighborhoods that are really in the Philadelphia area. And we have stable working and retired residents with high home ownership rates that really is crucial to economic mobility. But our weaknesses are aging homes and needs of repairs. And our residents often earn too much or for most of our public programs, and they struggle with some of the same issues some of our lower income residents are dealing with. Our opportunities really are a strategic investment that can strengthen these communities and really build generational wealth, but also prevent decline through early intervention. So we want to be more proactive. And our threats really are the risk of additional decline without support. Our residents might start being priced out and potential loss of neighborhood stability. And recognizing that neighborhoods really are the backbone of Philadelphia, Mayor Parker was really thinking about how do we support our traditional programs and what other programs do we need to develop to really provide those early type of interventions. Next slide. So One Philly Vision is really a comprehensive approach to both our vulnerable residents and our middle neighborhoods. It's going to really ensure that all Philadelphians have access to safe, quality housing, regardless of income level. And we're going to come up with a lot of creating pathways to home ownership and housing stability for middle income families that have often been excluded from other programs. So a lot of the programs that we are developing and expanding, we are going to expand our area median income. So very often we'll see a lot of our programs stop at the 60 or 80% of AMI, but we are going to expand to 100 and in some cases 120% of the area median income. And we feel it's important to really support the economic mobility of our neighborhoods and really create that generational wealth. And in our data, just realized it was really recognizing that housing stability affects entire communities, not just individual families, but also through a wide variety of incomes. So as we tie workforce development to some of the other things that we're doing, we want to ensure that we're still able to support those families. Next slide. So now I'll talk about three of our complementary homeownership programs that really will be removing barriers. So our Turn the Key program, which we will expand through this. And I think as Tim mentioned, well, Tim and Matt both mentioned in Chicago, one of the greatest assets the city has is our publicly owned land. So we also will be making that available for development. And one of those ways is Turn the Key. Turn the Key assists families in purchasing new affordable homes. It builds equity for future generations, and it really creates a clear pathway to generational wealth building and home ownership. We have a lot of BIPOC developers that participate in this program. The homes are capped at being sold at 280. We have a grant that allows a buy down of about 75,000 and then additional down payment assistance. So people are able to get into brand new 3-bedroom homes at about a purchase price of about $190,000. We've got our Philly First Home, which is provides the grants to first-time home buyers that covers down payment assistance and closing costs and reduces principal loans. And one of the programs that we are going to be launching that we're super excited about is the One Philly Mortgage, which will be a 30-year fixed rate mortgage with low down payment assistance. We're going to eliminate PMI. We're essentially going to use our bond funds to create a loan loss reserve and really look at how can we help banks mitigate their risks. We are not starting a public bank, but we'll be working with banks to provide that kind of loan loss reserve to mitigate their risks so they can expand the type of people that they would provide mortgages to. And we're really basing this off of the One Mass Mortgage that has been pretty successful in Massachusetts for the last few years. So that is one of our new programs that we're launching that we're super excited about. Next slide. So as mentioned, we have a lot of preservation programs that we will be expanding. So we've got our basic system repair program, which does emergency repairs for plumbing, electrical, and roofing, which has been really critical for our seniors and disabled residents who can't really afford to delay repairs. We've got our adaptive modification program, which is free home adaptations for disabilities, including stairway elevators or first floor bathrooms. And this really allows our residents to age in place safely. And then we've got our comprehensive repair program, which is Restore, Repair, Renew, which is low cost loans or for comprehensive home repairs, which really focuses on health, safety, and weatherization, and really improves the quality and the home values. And these programs really address immediate safety needs while also supporting long-term home maintenance. And it's super important for our seniors and those on fixed incomes and our residents with disabilities. Next slide. In our next slide, we'll talk a little bit about our neighborhood programs. So we've got neighborhood infrastructure. This is where we do a lot of repairs with our shared driveway, removes dangerous street trees from alleyways, improves safety and really property values for entire blocks. And our next two programs are one that the Middle Neighborhoods organization has been really hyper focused on. And we're borrowing from quite a few communities already doing that. So curbside appeal, this will be matching grants or for neighborhood beautification projects such as tree planting or vacant lot greening, street furniture, exterior improvements. I'm really excited to be talking to some of our city partners about launching that program, as well as a facade improvement program, which will really be supporting exterior home repairs, including weatherization or long-term maintenance, really to help preserve neighborhood character and property values. We currently have a commercial facade improvement, so really excited to be thinking about how we can launch a residential component to really start completing a lot of that kind of reduction and reducing of distressed properties and blight throughout our communities. And those are just a few of the programs that we'll be launching and expanding. And as over the process we're in now, as Jackie mentioned, council did the initial authorization. Every year we do have to go back to city council and get our annual program statement and budget approved. So we are in that process now. We will hopefully be going to city council the next month or so to get that approved and taking the first step. We are looking at Chicago's a little ahead of us, so we won't have all of the metrics, but we're looking at basically 30,000 units being impacted by this bond. 16,500 will be preservation, 13,500 will be on the production or new construction side of the bond. And we're super excited to move forward and really expand opportunities for housing throughout Philadelphia. And I think our next slide is just our contact information. If you have any further questions, and I know we have time for Q&A today, but thank you so much for having us. I think Mayor Parker is super focused on middle neighborhoods, and she is super excited to continue to support this work. And we're here for any questions.
Thank you. That's just so fascinating. I'm still my brain got stuck on your residential facade improvement. I've never heard of anybody doing that. So I look forward to hearing more about that. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to try and run through them. And if anybody wants to, any of our speakers want to tackle them by typing them in, that would be great. And if any of you had your hand up, it would be really helpful if you type your question into the Q&A and we could deal with it that way. Well, Wyman Winston asked, how effective were the TIFs in Chicago at improving neighborhoods?
That's a hard question to ask, I guess. I think in terms of it, we have certainly project by project level success stories, and that those have metrics associated with them. I think that saying like, oh, is a neighborhood, snapped out of existence of being disinvested because of a TIF. Like there's some cases, but that's just there's so much noise and chatter in there about like what is and like what does it even mean? Are we defining it by taxes? Property taxes are increasing. Like that is a metric of success for a single aspect of the city. But if we're also pricing out people, it's a really negative, or it's a really a complicated thing to say. So it's most of our metrics are based on a project level, and we certainly do have those, and they're you know, multiple and on our websites and data portals, things like that.
Well, to quote something you said earlier, you know, TIF is a source, it's not a program necessarily. So you have to have a strategy, right? To how you're going to deploy those resources. And it all depends on the strategy, I'm sure. Todd asks, what are the eligibility requirements for community development grants? I think he's talking about Chicago. Can both nonprofits and for-profit developers apply for them?
We don't, I mean, eligibility, we have certain, like, has to be within a certain use. If anybody's, I can put the site in the chat. It has like a full, these programs we have program manuals and application guides and things like that, but we've intentionally made the eligibility as limited as possible. It's just, the tagline I tell people is like, you tell us your dream and we'll tell you what the city can do.
Mhm.
So it's, we're keep it as open as we possibly can.
But you do allow nonprofit developers also to propose on
Yep. Nonprofits allowed it.
infill housing, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Wyman Winston asks, Philly, does your bonding compete with Penn State housing bonding? And is there value to the state housing bond program in your city?
Sure. So we, from the investor side, so from folks that would want to invest in the bonds, they're different. They're often different groups that are interested. So it's not like a direct competition. But in general, when we try and issue bonds, other Pennsylvania paper, because of tax related rules that investors care about, is just something that I think all of us, are mindful of. We try and find it the best date within when we need the money to bring a transaction to market. But I think to pivot to kind of the broader question, and Angela may want to weigh in on this as well, but I think we really look at the housing agencies and federal housing authorities as partners in the work that we're doing. And there's often a lot of collaboration on that front.
Absolutely. I think, a lot of the work we're doing as we're doing our program rollout has been in partnership with our housing finance agency. We have, as a part of our home plan, our larger home initiative, we have a 50-person advisory committee, which is insane. But nevertheless, our housing finance agency executive director or CEO, she does sit on that and she does participate or sends a designee. So they're one of our key partners, as well as simultaneously the state of Pennsylvania is finalizing their own housing plan. So there's been a lot of coordination between the two, and we're all hands on deck because there's a housing crisis throughout the entire state. So there's not a region of the state that's not dealing with some version of this housing crisis. So it's been a great way to really all work together.
Yeah. So John Sapora asks, this is kind of related to the 50-person advisory group. What's the role of resident advisory groups in planning and approving how and where funds are expended each year? That could go to either team.
Well, for us, we've got our home advisory group, which is a specific entity that was appointed by the mayor. It's probably in my whole career the largest one I've ever had to manage. Lots of thoughts on that, but it has been great because it's from pretty much everybody in the housing ecosystem. So we get to have a lot of interesting conversations in the room, which is very great preparation for city council hearings and any other neighborhood presentation. A part of our home plan also will be a special disposition process for land that's in the land bank for our home plan. And so that's where resident engagement will be a very specific process, because we'll be working with our district council members to pre-authorize certain parcels of land. So we'll be working with our registered RCOs, registered community organizations, as very formally as a part of that process that will start this fall as well.
Matt and Tim, are you converting TIF advisory groups? Were there any to, how is that advisory function moving when you move to bonds?
Well, Tim, you want to speak to, I don't know what exists for TIF.
Please go ahead first, Matt.
So broadly speaking, I think for two reasons, that sort of community advisory space is less applicable to the housing and economic development bond. The first reason is that as Tim said at the beginning of our presentation, the vast majority of these funds are going into existing programs that have sort of been long-standing and community informed for years or decades. There's just a new or replacement funding source. The second is that because our city council wanted to see a very specific spending plan, the negotiations, both sort of community informed and legislatively informed about how we were spending our money, kind of all already happened. And we sort of have the direction we have and are now implementing it. And many of our programs across DOH and DPD both themselves involve various forms of community input throughout, before, et cetera. But the bond program overall, it's really just a funding source for us at this point.
Yep. Got it. So all of your other community advisory functions were already in place, and this will just be additional funding. Bob Pipick in Baltimore asked about in Philly's bond funds, you're covering some operational activities like housing counseling, error title issues, foreclosure prevention. Do you have the same capital restrictions that Chicago talked about, or do you have a different kind of bond? Is yours taxable?
So when we invest in, the IRS tax rules are sometimes counter intuitive to some of the goals that governments may have with how you then use and invest those proceeds. So we will often look to taxable funding to support affordable housing supportive type investments so that we have more flexibility on what we can do and the structure of those programs. But the devil is unfortunately very, very much in the details. So we're spending a lot of time with Angela and her team right now to talk through, exactly what do you want to do? How do you want it to look? And so you really have to make sure that first that you are in compliance with the tax rules in whichever bucket you're looking in. And then the kind of second guiding document is the local authorization or state and local law. So we want to make sure when we bring an ordinance to city council that we have a pretty good understanding of exactly what we want to do if it's a new program that we're standing up, if it's not something that's already up and running, because once you set those guardrails, that's what you're operating within. And that's always a challenge, as everyone knows, with standing up a new program. There's inevitably something you didn't think of when you were planning everything out, and then you have to work with that structure that's in place.
Good point. Yeah. I think Angela just concurs. She's nodding. Yeah. It does sound to me like
She just wants me to stop asking her questions on all the program details.
You really need to know what your intent is before you decide on what kind of bonds you're issuing, and make sure you're not going to hamstring yourself going forward. Tim put into the chat, I think, a link. Oh yeah, there's a website just about their the CDG grant program. So if anyone wants to read more about that. Wyman Winston is our most prolific questioner. He asks, Philly, do you have a market of emerging private developers?
In my 5.5 months in Philadelphia, no, I think one of the things we are working on, so our land bank, and I should have mentioned, we also have a city adjacent nonprofit, the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation. They do have a program, and also Philadelphia launched an accelerator fund, so a CDFI last year as well. So through those entities, we do have emerging developer programs, but just like when I was in Chicago, particularly when you start looking at Black and brown developers, developing that pipeline still really needs to occur. And so a lot of our programs will be around supporting and developing and expanding that and making funds available, because recognizing that there's still a lot of barriers for people to enter into that aspect of development. But there is a pretty robust support structure in Philadelphia, we're finding, around developers. But like everywhere else, we get a lot to the same usual suspects.
Of course, yeah. And a question for Chicago about, you mentioned that you're doing a $150,000 subsidy on, I think, the infill units. And so Amanda's asking, what's your average cost to build per unit, for some context for that 150?
For the missing middle, I'd have to pull the numbers. I don't have it offhand, but Matt might be able to provide more context on the LIHTC. I mean, it's not particularly cheap.
Well, I think the comparable program on DOH's side would actually be more like rebuild, which also, similar to Missing Middle, produces sort of 1 to 6 unit homes on prior vacant lots for the most part. And there we're seeing total development costs of, I think, like 250 to 450, depending on the context, with subsidy levels that vary but are not terribly dissimilar to what Tim is talking about for Missing Middle at about 150. Rebuild is a great example of a program that the question of like, was it prevailing wage? Is it now prevailing wage? Which contractors have the capacity to handle reporting requirements around the prevailing wage? Also, what is the total development costs? That's one of the places where we're continuing to sort of learn and explore. But it's a great question.
Those infill buildings are not single family homes for the most part, right? Didn't you establish that they're going to be?
The programs that DOH runs range. I think it's from 1 up to 6 or more. But I think Missing Middle specifically on Tim's side, I'll let him answer.
Yeah, that's Missing Middle is specifically multifamily. They can
So it's like,
you can have an owner occupied building, but they can rent it out. Like if it's a 2 flat or 3 flat, they could rent out they could live in one unit and rent out the others. But that's the only like provision for
right.
Ownership of the.
You're trying to get a little more density in there. That makes sense. Okay. I'm switching over to questions in the chat. So I'm scrolling down. Is there a flat rate for the price of acquisition of the vacant infill lots for emerging developers in Chicago?
It's $1. We write down the land.
Oh, okay. $1. And David O'Donnell asked, how's the capacity for issuing municipal bonds to, let's see, to pay back housing bonds calculated? This may be more technical than we ever imagined here. What data set assumptions do you use to project that revenue? I mean, in the case of Chicago, right, what's being generated by the TIFs already.
Yeah, so we just used current tax data at the time of approval, and we ran it out over a number of years with an assumed 1% annual growth, which is extremely conservative. About, on average, like historically, you chop it up any different way, it's about 2.5% to 3% annually in Chicago. So low growth rates, and we assumed no new development would occur whatsoever in the rest of the city or the TIF districts. So very conservative.
Very conservative. Jackie, do you want to say anything about?
Yep. So ours, we also budget and project forward very conservatively. We are required by law to do a 5-year plan every year. So we're always doing a 5-year forecast of what our costs and our revenues look like. But because ours is not backed by a specific TIF district or a specific tax, we're looking at the broad growth of this entire city's revenue base. So we have different models by tax type, by other revenue sources that the city receives. And in general, we are very, very conservative because the consequences of being wrong are so dire that we want to make sure that we're very conservative about what we can afford going forward. And then on the bond side, we're just looking at what the interest rates are around the time we're going to issue. We also budget conservatively on that. So we tend to overperform or perform better than what our estimates were in both directions. But that's really the process that we go through anytime we're looking at what we can afford.
The second question David puts here, which is that's really interesting. Might you be able to do a municipal bond based on projected avoided costs? Think social impact bonds that avoid public health costs, or resilience bonds that invest in readiness for extreme weather. Are there any models out there that do that?
We do not do social impact bonds. That is a construct that some look to. So like a performance-based issuance where you pay higher costs if you don't achieve certain milestones. We do not go that route, but we are certainly interested in like the economic connection of all of those factors, right? So especially if we're looking at something that has energy savings components or other type of rebates that might be associated, and that's a little different than the project we're talking about today, but we will look at on an economic basis how those things interrelate, but that's not how we're budgeting and projecting our costs.
Interesting. So Linda Charles asks, if bond funds are provided to housing projects as a loan, that's, I guess, the first question, are they? And then what would be the terms? Are they coterminous with the primary lenders?
So within our multifamily space, within our LIHTC space, we do structure our gap financing as loans. This means, by the way, that we have to use taxable bond proceeds instead of tax exempt, which increases the cost of borrowing for us, but it would increase the gap for them even more because if we gave it as a grant, they would have to pay income tax on it and the gap would just go up. So we do structure it as a loan. We often make those loans coterminous with the existing structures associated with their LIHTC financing. So they tend to be between 30 and 40 years.
Interesting. Okay. Let's see. And Bob asked if you can share the underwriting terms for the repair facade and other smaller programs. Does the Philly team have, oh, there's the contact information for Jackie and Angela. Do you have, I feel like I should know this, a website where, I guess you haven't stood up the new programs yet, but for
Correct.
instance, the 3R program has been around for quite a while. So you would be able to see the underwriting guidelines for that. I tell you what, why don't we pledge that we will seek all of the sources, as many sources as are publicly available for the details on the programs that our speakers have talked about today. And we'll include those in the follow-up email we do with the link to the presentation and the slide deck, because they do publish a lot of this. Yes. Okay, we're getting close to our time. And there are some links in here, but we'll collect them all and put them in the follow-up. I am going to be selfishly ask for one more question, which is Matt or Tim. I'm really intrigued by this stabilizing condos or co-ops. Just from living out west, there's so many of them, and I think I've started to realize how fragile all of these are, and they're usually very affordable ways to own property. So how did you come to that? And do you feel like you're the only ones doing that, or is this becoming more common?
Man, I don't know if he's still on the participants list, but Jim Wheaton, who's here from our
Oh.
team as a participant, actually runs that program. Well, I'll say what I know, and he may grill me afterwards on all the things I got wrong. But it's a relatively new program for us, and it's really coming out of some needs that were identified from community groups and local council members. Sort of originated in our South Shore community, and the program is now expanded citywide. And the focus is really on, we have our Troubled Buildings Initiative, our rebuild program. We have a variety of ways to work with the individual owners in shared ownership
Oh,
settings. But
okay.
the hole that was identified was that if there's an HOA that is underwater, that no one's paying their HOA dues, there's high vacancy, no one wants to move in because the conditions are bad and they can't reverse. They're in a vicious cycle, essentially, right? So the HOA needs support as well. And so this program pairs technical assistance and governance support for the HOA itself, not funded by our bond, with capital assistance to the community ownership to make roof repairs, parking lot repairs, structural repairs, facade repairs, in order to make buying a unit in the HOA,
Even
interesting
possible.
again.
Yeah. That's
It's a great
fascinating
program.
to me. Maybe we'll do another webinar just on stabilizing.
And it won't be me as a
condos.
panelist, but yes, absolutely.
That's right. We'll get Jim Wheaton to talk about it. So we need to pull this to a close. I want to thank all four of our speakers. They're just really tops in their fields, really great explanations of what they're doing. I really do hope that this generates more bonds across the country that include, intended programming for middle neighborhoods. And I hope that more cities are weaning themselves off of federal funding and starting to develop more local sources. Just to let you know, a couple of upcoming webinars that we have. We're co-sponsoring, co-hosting a webinar with AEO in their Data Dialogue series. And this one's going to be about basically in Chicago, there have been a number of business districts that have food-centric planks in their retail array that have been provided with a certain kind of technical assistance and have outperformed their peer business districts that did not have that assistance. It's been studied by AEO and by the Chicago Fed. We're going to talk a little bit about what the results of that research showed, and then with the practitioners about how that exactly played out in their middle neighborhood business districts in supporting their food-centric businesses. And that's on October 28th. And because you signed up for this webinar, you'll get an email announcing the registration for that webinar. And then we also have, not firmed up the date, but our final expanding resources so far webinar will be why Plano, Texas and Danville, Virginia invest general revenue into middle neighborhood programming. So watch your email for registration announcements on that. Follow us on LinkedIn. We love to see you there. We do a lot of announcements there. And please email us if you would like to see us do webinars or case studies on anything, any other topic, or perhaps even a follow-up to this one. We always like to promote our partner, Center for Community Progress has a cornerstone webinar series that's very good. And we'll get an evaluation after this, this program ends. So please tell us about your experience today. And we're happy to welcome you by virtue of your attendance here into our community of practice. We have about 4,000 people in that across the country now. And it's a really great way to interact with your counterparts in cities across America who are working either to research middle neighborhoods, to stabilize them, to grow them, or to organize policy to support them. So thanks to everybody again, and we'll see you next time. Have a great week.